Good morning, everybody. I'm Nicola Barrett, Chief Corporate Learning Officer at Emory Executive Education. Wonderful to have you join us today for Business Over Breakfast. Last month, we focused on ways to help us improve our communication skills, one of those perennial leadership capabilities that we're all on the journey to get better with. This month, we're turning our attention to technology and digital disruption, areas that many of us need to become more competent in, regardless of where you sit in your organization. We're going to start by revisiting one of the topics we introduced in our December Year in Review webinar, The Future Revisited, How Technology Shapes Commerce and Society. To guide us with this exploration, we are excited to welcome back Professor Benn Konsynski, Distinguished Chaired Professor of Information Systems and Operations Management. He joined Goizueta many years ago. If he wants to tell you when he comes on, he can. I'm not going to. He is an expert in everything digital and digital commerce in particular. Ben serves as both our historian and futurist, challenging students and working professionals to consider not what is, but what's possible. And that's going to be our focus for this session today. Ben welcomes your engagement through chat and the Q&A throughout his presentation so that we can help him answer your questions and get your questions answered this morning if at all possible. If technology and data science are areas you or your colleagues need to become more technologically fluent in, I invite you to check out our upcoming short courses. We have two. One is Data Science for Decision Making that's coming up at the end of March in New York City. That is featuring our new dean, Gareth James and Daniela Witten, and also AI and Machine Learning for Business, and that starts April 24th. And team, I actually may do that one because I need to become more fluent in that area. Anyway, enjoy your explorations this morning with Ben, and we look forward to seeing you on the February 16th for our second webinar in the technology series around generative artificial intelligence like ChatGPT. Ben, over to you.
Thank you. Welcome, folks, and good morning. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today and looking at issues of trying to raise the horizon of our thinking about how technology is changing and shaping commerce and society aspects. And those of you that know me know that that's how I spend my time. My courses are continuously a troika of dealing with not only the technologies, but the domains of direction and application. And so the three elements are the capabilities brought about by technologies, the elements from imagination that are often childlike, that look at questioning and challenging every aspect of it, and then the creativity that deals with directions of application that are often associated with age and experience, of which I have plenty. And so we tend to try to balance the nexus of those three elements in our activities. I was going to have us start and spend our time in the 2062 horizon, because I want us to take horizons that are bigger than 4 or 5 to 10 years. We tend to take these weenie projections and look merely 5 or 10 years, and we're self-satisfied that we're very good at it. 5 and 10 years is easy. Most of what that is in that future already exists. It just doesn't exist in a widely distributed fashion. But if we're going to get bold and think about patterns of disruption, we need to think in a farther horizon. And a good example of that horizon would be in 1962, there was a cartoon series on television called The Jetsons. And George Jetson was, it was 100 years ahead, 2062, which seemed like a long time in that horizon. But it was sort of a fanciful notion to look at what 100 years would be like. And George Jetson was 40 years old in that setting in 2062. So what does that mean? That means right now in 2023, George actually is about 6 months old now. So George is already born and working his trajectory. But that horizon that they put in was very prescient in many ways. There are aspects like the home office, online entertainment activities, telemedicine, video chats, things that were very fanciful in those days are common and an expectation today. And certainly we're very comfortable with those practices in there. Those of you who know me know that I'm a first principles person, that not unlike the practices of Steve Jobs or Elon Musk, who reduce elements to first principles and then challenge those principles early on. Whether it's a technology, whether it's a product as well, is a better approach to try to understand. We tend to focus on technology, perceiving it as related to the capabilities brought about by science. And science is one side of it, applied science. The other side of technology is that related to will, to doing something that wouldn't happen if we didn't otherwise apply the technology. So we don't often exercise it. We try to look at the capabilities moving forward, but we miss out on some of the aspirational activities, or we try to discover them instead of letting those lead. So one is push and one is pull. And we find this a problem with startups, for example. Right now, so many startups that I've worked with try to sell capabilities. They fall in love with their own capabilities, and they want you to fall in love with their capabilities, and they want to promote their capabilities. And it's tough to tell them, whether you're on the board or in an advisory capacity, that don't expect the customer, client, prospect to fall in love with your capabilities. They don't buy capabilities, they're buying solutions. They're buying their solutions. If you create a bridge and a gap between your capabilities and their solutions that you have to fill, you're missing out on the opportunity and probably not likely to get the attachment. So we need to continuously balance that issue of our capabilities and the desired solutions in both a push and a pull fashion as well. We spend a lot of our time nowadays on different threads of technologies, and we elevate them. And you're going to hear more about that generative AI over the last year. Certainly many of my student projects have been around text to image and large language models as well as a part of their activities. But we tend to amplify a single technology at a time. If it was blockchain a few years ago, or crypto, or metaverse, whatever, we go squirrel to squirrel in much of our fashion. And there's great insight in them, but they don't dominate themselves for long. And what we need to do is understand each of those paths of evolution and then start bringing them together. So yes, in my classes, we deal with these threads of technologies. We deal with the history and the future. Future's best seen with a running start, and therefore our activities and interests look at the evolutionary history of a technology and deal with its future potential pathways that they have as well. So AI, ML, 5G, Web3, blockchain, crypto, virtual, augmented reality, virtual worlds. Those that have been in my classes know we deal a lot with these technologies, robotics and automation, quantum computing, biotech, genomics, cloud computing, edge computing, NLP for natural language processing. All these are worthy pursuits, but they're only threads. And they become more meaningful, more powerful when we start bringing them together. And so we can look at each individual one on its trajectory of evolution and its future projection as well. But the power comes in understanding that most discussions are on velocity. What's changing? I hate the word trending because it often gets people focused on velocity. What's changing in the market? That's their squirrel to squirrel chase. If you really want to understand the future, we've got to get into acceleration. Acceleration is more important than velocity. How is the change changing? Is if you really want to leapfrog and jump ahead, you need to focus on acceleration, not on velocity as a part of that. And those that know me know a first principle to me is never grow up. One of the highest crimes we can commit is growing up and losing much of the engagement that we had as children. Let me transition now and move into looking at how we take these threads and weave them together into core concepts and some mega trends that we count on. We tend to look at the waves. If any of you have been into sailing, you know you're watching the water, the surface, and the disruption on the surface as an indication of where the wind's going. But we sometimes neglect the fact that underneath that water are strong currents, possibly flows and tides that may have a critical factor on the dominant flow. And so we need to look at how we weave these together to create new platforms, new ecosystems that really disrupt our marketplaces, that change our assumptions and beliefs about how markets work. We tend to focus on speeding up the mess. We tend to spend our time trying to fix the last century. And it's a tough thing to challenge people to say, stop trying to fix the 20th century. Many of their solutions are about that, or what I call speeding up the mess. But when we look at some of the macro trends, we're entering an age of enchantment is the way I characterize it. That things that were not a participant in commerce or society are now able to participate. We have 4 billion people on the earth, half the earth, that have smart edge devices. And we tend to focus a lot of our applications on address to those individuals and participation by those individuals. But while there are 4 billion people with edge devices, there are 40 to 50 billion things that are now becoming a part of our living ecosystem of commerce and society. And therefore, we need to approach the design of an extended enterprise, an extended you, an extended home to look at the nexus of engagement of things as well as people. And that's an age, that's what I call the age of enchantment. Another critical principle that is game-changing as well. Most of the industrial age, from especially through the 20th century, had a focus on efficiency, centralization, simplification. And I think we need to go back to learning lessons from nature. Nature doesn't grow centralized. It even doesn't grow decentralized. Yes, a tree is a decentralization example, but the more important element is the forest and how the trees connect underneath. And they don't connect in a decentralized fashion. I almost wish we could ban that word, because the more interesting things grow in distributed fashion. Nature informs us in our thinking about how things grow. So let's take lessons from a multi-billion year system that knows how to grow things and have things thrive and survive. And a lot of that is growth in distribution. The exciting things coming are growing distributed, like the internet itself, which does not grow centralized, does not grow decentralized. And I say the same thing for the metaverse domain as well. We're not focusing on walled garden or an extended walled garden. We need to focus on how the omni structure, the omniverse, operates and grows in an organic fashion, much like nature. So even that digital environment's going to behave and learn from nature in its growth patterns. Another element is that the passive shall be active. So many things that are dumb are now made smart. So many things that are have been outside or when we deal with bits, with atoms, we tend to wrap bits around them to support it. But what if those atoms were made smarter, made able to sense and serve and engage, inform, have preference? Does a package have an aspiration to go to Columbus, Ohio? And how does what voice does it have in that process? And so more and more things that have been passive are now becoming active. That's true about paper. It's true about electronic documents that we can envelop and endow with a sense of experience, a sense of purpose, and a sense of objective. And so more and more we're able to engage in systems that are a truly hybrid. We drop our homomorphism and that's so focused on people that we start looking at ecosystems as we engage with robotics, robotic environments, intelligent environments, that we find a partnership there and then a cooperation that is a part of our evolving learning environments. Another legacy from the industrial age is the pursuit of simplicity and organization. And one of the things that the winners in the 21st century are those that don't get bound by that. We've learned to tolerate complexity. We learn to embrace complexity and handle it as well. So we can't let complexity get in the way of it. Reflect on the fact of something like an Uber. 20 years ago, trying to do Uber, we would say, oh, we can't do that. It's so complex, too many elements in there with GPS communications activities that are needed, dispatch, and edge devices for the customer. But that complexity is eminently manageable now. And so more and more, we can't let a perceived complexity or an assumption about sustained complexity stop us in our pursuits. And so more and more, I would submit that the winners in that 2062, in the Jetson era, are going to be those that aren't bound by complexity or don't let that stop them as well. And another part of that is that things are not only getting smarter, and they're getting purposeful, but they can be forceful and enforce their own rights and privileges and understand rights and authorities. Commerce is based on two core principles, and that is authentication and attestation. Who are you and what rights do you have? And that's not only true of people, it's true of things as well. And so more and more, we're able to embed intelligence into things, not just a sensory experience of reporting, a robotic sense, but a sense of pursuit and achievement. A friend of mine is a digital artist who did an NFT, a non-fungible token of a digital house on Mars. So we call it Mars House. And she sold that at auction in the NFT hot period for $500,000. So that person bought the digital art. So many messages in there about a digital asset and digital asset management. But even smarter than the $500,000, she embedded a smart contract into that house, that digital asset. So whenever that digital asset is sold to somebody else, she gets 10% off the top of the sale, regardless of the price. And so that digital artifact, that digital asset, carries a contract with it embedded, such that whenever its rights are transferred, the compensation for that is passed on to as well as a part of that. Another challenge for the 21st century is that of letting go, how we let go of decision rights and authorities. If there is one macro trend for the 21st century that I would attribute, it is a reallocation of decision rights and authorities. As we break this homo chauvinism that has us focus on humans and human-centered reality, we start to relinquish decision rights and authorities. When you open a car door and you do not see a driver in it, if you're going in as a passenger, do you hesitate? I hesitate to get in because there's no driver here in the vehicle. I'm used to a human driving that vehicle. Well, we managed to kill 37,000 of our citizens every year in automobile accidents, and 1.3 million worldwide in automobile accidents. So maybe we ought to give a chance to vehicles that are wisely autonomous at some point. And so I asked the students, at what point when you open the door and you see a human in the car, do you say, wait a minute, I don't think I ought to get in here? That we start switching that. And it's hard for them to believe that, but I asked them, when your grandparents, what happened when the first elevator opened up and they didn't see an elevator operator in it? Were they hesitant about getting into that elevator? And yes, they were. And there were a lot of accidents in the early days of that as well. But we trust in elevonics, where we trust on the planes. Actually, the pursuit that many of us know, that pilots don't always fly the planes and pilots don't always land the plane. And do you want the pilot to land the plane when you know that the 80%, let's just arbitrary, 80% of all landing accidents are pilot error? We did not let the pilots land the space shuttle when we had it in there. We let the avionics make the decisions to land. So ever more, we're letting go of rights and privileges to systems and ecosystems that we believe are as smart as we need in order to serve us. But it's a muscle we have to exercise, and an element that is based on an expectation of trust, that we have a continuous expectation that trust is not only there, but it's always tested, continuously tested. Our old systems, again, you go back 20th century model and even earlier, where we talk about annual audits. Can you, at what point will we stop this circus of, quote, annual audits in corporations and systems, instead of having continuous audits, continuous assessment, continuous trust challenges, and continuous trust provisioning as well? 20% of the employees at Ant Financial in China are individuals that are associated with risk management. every transaction, every prospective transaction is a continuous risk assessment, continuous risk assignment as a part of it. And more our enterprise and inter-enterprise activities are on a continuous trust basis, in part with a continuous assessment, if not audit, as we might have it as well. So we need to build that expectation that I trust but verify, but not on an episodic basis, not annually or not monthly, but all the time. I'm challenging the ethics and empathy of the system as well. So it's not just the truth of the system and trust in it, but also a part of that trust is the expectation of empathy and ethics in those practices as well. We are in a remix era. Those of you who are late millennials and Gen Z have already assimilated that concept and assimilated the skill sets of the remix era. We have an ability to take things apart, throw some pieces away, and reassemble it sometimes with some new pieces, but a lot different in a different way than we've historically had before we took it apart. And so in the remix era, there's a willingness to reuse, to copy, to pillage and plunder what exists, and to challenge and throw away pieces that no longer fit, instead of looking at accelerating, speeding up the mess as the way of efficiency. And that's true in our industries as well. There's not an industry immune from this, whether it's music or banking, whatever it might be, that we need to, we're able to what we call elementalize. You break it down into elements and then decide what needs to be there and what doesn't as a part of it. And where can we disintermediate and build new systems? So the disruption is not just in creating efficiency and coordination. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute, as we look at what we call decolonization of industries and also decommoditization ongoing as macro trends. A key part is the reduction of the cognitive load on the individual. And this has been a pursuit for the longest time, as we look, how do we get closer to the brain? How do we get closer to thought? How do we get closer to expectations? How do we get closer to will, to your will and desires, as we start moving towards more immersion? And we've historically had a past where we would be dealing with, we had to translate our mind into a command and do the command going forward in some keyed way into a system activity. And we need to get more and more towards the brain thought, even preemptive thinking. And that's a part of AI as a partner going forward, looking at the partnership of artificial intelligence, whether it's through neural link technologies or whatever. Our systems need to be designed to reduce the cognitive load. Our user interfaces, the user experience that we use for our apps that I deal with in my appcology class, for example, we design to reduce the cognitive load of the user, to bring the system to the user instead of making the user come to the system, and that we have. So it's a singular and directed pursuit, changing especially as we get into more immersion technologies, virtual world and metaverse activities that are emergent, that will be more immersive and embracing of multiple sensory experience as well. This is a shotgun of a variety of things. It's mainly to get us to trigger our imagination in giving thought to what is possible, and not just looking at stretching capabilities or speeding up the mess, but looking at challenging basic assumptions about what is. Become like a 2-year-old and ask why whenever you're told this is the way it is. Ask why it is that way and why it can't be other than that. So our challenge is to understand our aspirations and will. That's the pull side of it, of technology. The magic element of it is feeding and succeeding in our aspirations and will. And concomitant with that is always a first principles element of trying to challenge all assumptions and beliefs along the way. So we ask not only the why, but why not something else as well. And that's why we need to move into first principles practice. That's been, as I mentioned, the success of Elon Musk. It's been the success of Steve Jobs and others. And we tend to forget that sometimes in looking at improving the past instead of displacing as well. And a final mega trends that are operating now in the 21st century, a decommoditization is underway. And a lot of it, because of efficiency, because of industrial age activities, we pursued commoditization, make things simple, make things the same. It's easier to market if they're similar. And so we commoditize things. We work very hard in directing things towards commoditization. We don't need to do that anymore. And digital reality allows us to decommoditize. And so macro trend that we see in across all industries is that movement of decommoditization. Another is partly because of our discipline and practices of the industrial age, that we focused on colonization. We centralized. We sought efficiency, economies of scope and scale as a part of that. And we see the result even in our tech industry, where we see things roll up into central colonies. The opportunity now in the 21st century and in the digital age is a decolonization. Look to healthcare, look to many of our domains where we've almost spent a lot of our time striving for colonization to create efficiencies and effectiveness. And we're moving more and more towards decolonizing and distributing rights and privileges. Health is maybe better served in the home than an expensive venue like a hospital, and that the patient needs to be involved in the engagement of care. In fact, even within the health provider community, registered nurses and physician assistants, PAs and RNs, are often more the front line than the central provider. And yet our systems are designed around the godlike center of the physician as a decision maker. So decision rights and authorities are being distributed, and that a lot of our industries are going to explode, and we got to re-put them back together in new 21st century ways as well. Let me stop at this point.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard. At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought. Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it. I award you no points, and may God have mercy on your soul.
Let me leave you with that and see if there are questions, comments, and or insults at this point. The key message also, though, is make sure you never grow up. Maintain that often our education system is one of the worst culprits in destroying the patterns of imaginative thinking that we have in youth, from youth. And my aspiration is always to be simultaneously the youngest and the oldest person in the room, for that notion of imagination, and also the notion of creativity based on experience and exposure to events as well. And so I leave you with that thought to, how do you aspire to be simultaneously the youngest and the oldest in the room when you're in a group? Because there's so many in the middle that are in the today, in the near horizon. Let me stop at this point and see if there are.
Oh, there are questions, Ben, lots of.
Uh-oh.
So,
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Hey, Shobha.
What you said is inspirational, and I wish my two 18-year-old sons had the benefit of your thoughts on this, both going through a somewhat stifled education system. Anyway, enough on that. To the questions. Stephen said, love the shades, Dr. Ben. We adopted balanced scorecards. We managed by objectives. We walked around. The latest leadership fad seems to be OKRs with big aspirational goals. Did I mention ESG metrics? What's different? Should we consider returning to drive profitable growth and optimizing returns for shareholders? I think this might have been in response to a point you made about simplification.
Yeah, and I think it's a clear hallmark of the issue that would differentiate an Elon Musk and a Steve Jobs from it, is we're trying to fix the today, we're trying to fix the past, and those are applications and directions that try to address improvement, and we need to start with possibilities of disruption. And that's where you get into the first principles of the market. And sometimes we touch on that when we say, what business are we in? What market are we in? What is our market going? I've always found it more useful in working with large corporations. Take a 10 to 20 year horizon. Probably they get less bold after 10, but what is an article 10 years from now, in this month, in February of that month, say about what happened to you in that 10-year period? And the only way you get people to rest away from the today is to understand what their wishes and aspirations are for the tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And so I would do exactly what you're talking about, Steve, but I would also add and incorporate something that begins forward and pulls to that future. So I don't want a displacement. I want to know what a day in the life is 15, 20 years from now. But then I also want to know what the waypoints were along the way. And mm-hmm. That's why an article, writing an article in a magazine that may still exist at that time, we don't necessarily know, that would say what waypoints, what happened 5 years in, what happened 10 years in, would give a better sense of reaching for and letting pulled forward instead of pushing.
Thank you. Honyan asks, what if AI bots made the wrong choice? And how do you see humans augment their acceptable risks tolerance?
Well, first of all, they will make the wrong choice, and they have made the wrong choice. And we're coming to face that a lot right now. I posted literally a video for my class yesterday on exactly that issue of when and how they make the wrong choice, and how we set guardrails that prevent us from doing stupid things. And it's not about making a decision as much as making a suggestion about it. In fact, most of our AI tools are multiple networks. It's not one brain. It's multiple brains, and it's multiple multiple decision processes. We use that term generative adversarial networks. We bring multiple decision suggestions to fore, and the system selects from those suggestions based on other criteria. So it doesn't have to. We can tolerate mistakes if we tolerate a collaboration to the decision, human and non-human.
So to what extent, so Honyan also posed another question, to what extent are AI bots making critical decisions for humans today or will be in the very near future? How prevalent is that?
Well, I think we're doing that right now with our IoT deployment, our smart cities activities. Everyone in their house has about 12 devices that are or are not, that are connectable or connected, that can be a part of the living ecosystem of your house. And so more and more, we're starting to turn the dial on engaging those activities. Your car has about 200 sensors in it. Most of them don't talk to each other. We learned via, say, Toyota 20 years ago that, wow, if I get certain sensors coordinating, I can do automatic parking. I can do lane assistance. So I have a section in my class I call the Road to Autonomy, and this is part of this letting go activity. And certainly, and a good example is in the automotive area where we turn the dial up. We set standards for when you move from one stage to another and phase up into decision rights and authorities.
Mm-hmm. Alan says in the chat, I believe that the pace of corporate work these days does not allow for time to ponder and think of breaking boundaries. We are too focused on hitting current measurements. Is there a viable solution for that? How do we get out of that hamster wheel type of thinking?
I think that's an excellent question. And for example, in my class, we spend time on the future of work, and certainly correlated with that is in the virtual world activities and looking at those. We perceive there's this tension of Zoom wall, interface flat, communication, or back to the office. Why the heck go back to the office if you can bring in together what you're missing from the office, which is often what we call the water cooler chats, casual encounters? I can bring that into those worlds. So in my class, for example, we spend time looking at where we bring two principles in place. I have to have a place to go to, a virtual place, not necessarily a physical place, and proximity. When I'm near to somebody, they can hear me. When I'm far away, they can't. And so proximity matters as it would in a place. And so if we bring some of those principles together, we can find new ways of collaborating. And with respect to the issue of meditation technologies are astounding in the immersion technologies. Look at something like TRIP, TRIPP, in the meta world and things like that. We're going to be able to provide wonderful opportunities for pondering and exploring and personal meditation. The value of sleep is extraordinary. In fact, I'm hoping to write a book with one of our alums who is a sleep doctor and dealing with how sleep matters. And sleep doesn't have to be always the overnight thing. And the different forms of interruption and meditation and contemplation. You can easily suspend your reality and move into a different reality for whatever time, seconds, minutes, whatever it might mean, to give you that sense and need of refreshment.
Can't wait. I think we all need more sleep. Meditation would be a good thing to put into my life. Gary asks, in the remix process, is the focus on all elements, including the core, or does the core remain a solid principle and we look at the pieces that support the core?
My answer would be yes. in a true remix practice, nothing is subject to nothing is immune from questioning and challenge. And so, yes, in current banking, for example, we elect a core, and then we operate beyond the core. So I want to elementalize and recast and repackage beyond the core. But then again, I want to challenge the core ultimately. And we need to start. If you're a retail bank, you're a commercial bank, that whole practice is changing based on the expectations of the client. And we need to start out there. Again, it's not a push. What old banking has been, our core with added on services, it's going to invert. I work with a group of actually internet pioneers, Vint Cerf and Tim Berners-Lee, who invented the World Wide Web, in looking at people-centered internet. What we missed in designing and developing, those of us that worked on the early stages, were some of the aspects of how these things would be used. The rights and privileges are being abused. Your data is being abused. We need to make you the owner of it. So we need to modify our operating infrastructure for it. So we need to challenge up and down. That doesn't mean you challenge everything at once.
That'll be interesting how you get that toothpaste back in the tube then. That actually relates to a question that Han Yin asks, which is, how do you imagine technology changes in social media? Do you see social platforms going to be more highly regulated?
Yes, they will be more highly regulated. In fact, a lot of our information collections, they're regulated in the back and regulated in the front. The messaging that goes in and out, but also how the information is being used. So we need regulation there. It's sort of like crypto. You need the crisis of FTX to get people down to earth and say it's the Wild West is over. We're citifying. We're making cities now, and we need some discipline in doing so. That doesn't mean you stifle innovation in doing that. So we will see regulation along the lines of the social media practices, both in the back end and the front end.
Thank you. Larry asks, how do you differentiate decommodization from
commoditization?
Thank you. For example, in healthcare, having disparate systems communicating with each other relies on certain standards. So how do you...
and certainly we strongly need to do that. And I've worked with CDC for some time dealing with it. Communication is a huge breakdown, but look at right now, your HMR, your health management record that you have right now is owned by Epic, is owned by your care provider, is owned by Cerner, and are protected and defended by them and not shared with another provider that might need that information. So we need to open the gates, but we need to open those gates safely and facilitate sharing, or we need to put you, patient or patient agent, in charge of making the decision of when to share, so that we can have tools to broker information in a distributed fashion, so that I can accommodate the home and heterogeneous devices communicating cooperatively in your home and with your care providers and with your payors too, as a part of that. And Tim Berners-Lee, for example, is doing this in the IoT domain. As we start to look at things start talking, we need to be careful about who they talk to and what they say. And we need to govern the security and privacy associated with that communication. So yes, there needs to be standards and intelligence in the middle, but we can't let that stop us. We just have to do it right.
So how do you do that, Ben? I mean, who's going to do that?
Well, the
it all sounds
collective
great, but
communities that want to participate, we already do that we do that often through centralized standards. Yes,
Mhm.
I'm Xfinity, buy all my security tools, and then you've got a closed system environment. And yeah, I may trust certain systems. I'm those of you that know me know I'm an Apple fan, been working with them since Steve Jobs period with the advanced technology group. And closed systems are not necessarily bad, but we need open systems, but we need open, safe systems in doing
Right.
so. As we start building the trust environment, the adoption we let market forces move that.
Okay, thank you. Can you discuss some of the ways to help us understand futurist thinking, especially when there is a tendency to do customer research and understand friction points in the market when you are looking for future pulls versus backward pushes?
Yeah, I think that's a good question and a good exercise. We tend to start again by looking at what's done today, and talking to the customer is not always the wisest thing to do. Steve Jobs was more extreme on that. He would say, "Why the heck would I talk to them? They don't know what they want." Henry Ford said, "You ask them what they want a faster horse." And so sometimes they're not always the richest and singular resource for the aspirations of the market, but certainly they contribute to it. If you take the element of the start with the experience, the customer client experience and a reach forward, what it might be, what would be desirable. I would rather use a focus group on testing against the desirability of aspirational rather than asking them what they think they want. They don't always know what they want. In fact, likely they don't know necessarily what they want because they don't know what is possible. And this is my problem with our historic strategy, and my strategy colleagues will have to close their ears for a minute when they would say, if you want to design systems, you start with the strategy and then select the technology. And I say that's quite wrong, because technology changes what is possible and it changes strategic options. If you don't start with an exploration of strategic options, you're going to miss options. And if you start with a perceived strategy, you're very likely to miss strategic options.
Okay. Kamishra asks, is there a space for programming around corrective design or a framework that is not influenced by the dominating industry despite its failings?
Give me that again.
Is there a space for programming around corrective design or a framework that is not influenced by dominating industry despite its failings?
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good question, and a lot of it is the dimensions of risk and the outside in revolution and disruption, and the ability to challenge assumptions and beliefs in doing so. And we've seen many successes and many failures in attempts at setting a discipline for changing, even by large players with deep pockets in it. But you see movements and shifts. ChatGPT is interesting mostly to me, not because of the novelty. Toys become tools. Right now, I see it more as a toy, and it can become a tool. But its main mission is democratization of AI. Making it available and accessible to the individual will be the revolutionary aspect of it, and the celebration of something like ChatGPT. If I can democratize it, it's going to create a demand for hygiene and discipline of the market. And we don't have that now, but that's true in crypto and other domains. So they often start with unhygienic practices. and they call and need and demand for hygiene, regulation to some extent. The key is not to turn that dial too fast and regulate to kill.
Right.
And so we're I think the spirit of that something like ChatGPT is that democratization of AI accessibility. My prediction, hear me now and believe me later, AI is not going giant brain. It's not going giant brain in the cloud. It's going to go to AI as a service. And web, you're just like you have web services, you're going to have AI service elements. The distributed form of that's going to be pockets and packets of AI that will come together as needed to adjudicate decisions that are needed. And so it's going to be much more fragmented, much more tolerated complexity.
So I've got time for one last very quick question, Ben. Do you believe that a democratization of information is in contrast to the tendencies for ecosystems to favor large players?
Oh, yes, absolutely so. And and so we need the discipline of the markets and governance, governance and governments to prevent that from happening. And our natural tendency, again, we start turning on our industrial age values of scale and scope and tolerate that colonization and tolerate that commoditization. But if I turn the rights and start with first principle rights to say that your information about you is your information, you need to have control over it, you need to have choice, and you need to get compensation if your information derives value somehow. Those are the three elements that we're trying to set the infrastructure for doing so. And doing that will prevent the kind of vacuuming. If the firm has over 90% of its revenue from advertising, you have a perverse incentive to collect information. And that is Alphabet and Meta at this point right now. So they're sort of exemplars of it. Most of the other players are at least look to where the money is and the revenue, and you can see their values and incentives and which ones are perverse.
Ben,
other than that, I have no opinions.
We've got so many more questions, but we've run out of time. So thank you so much. I'm going to hand over to Pam.
Ben, thank you, thank you, thank you. As always, you generated a ton of questions, and we appreciate your time with us, and we really appreciate all those great questions that have been coming in. You've got several SOBs out there, and for those who didn't see my note, those are students of Ben. So we give a warm welcome to you. So quickly looking ahead, our next Business Over Breakfast is going to continue our conversation around technology and ask the question, are machines coming for your job? I think Ben talked a little bit about that, and I think the answer he would say is no, probably not. But we'll specifically be focusing on generative AI. Jen mentioned ChatGPT as just one of those technologies. So join us on February the 16th with David Schwedel for that. And then looking ahead, Nicola mentioned a few of our upcoming short courses. We invite you to check those out on our website. But in particular, our managerial leadership program is one that is always filling up. It focuses on both individual and team leadership and spend some time talking about crisis leadership. We leverage some individual assessments, and I think you'll find that it is an incredibly engaging program. And as Nicola mentioned, our own dean is going to be, teaching in the data science for decision making at the Penn Club in New York City in March. And so check these and others out on our website. We thank you again for joining us today and on all of our Business Over Breakfast webinars, and look forward to seeing you on February the 16th. And Ben, thank you again. See you around.